Hello and welcome to the first episode of the season for the Tigers Down Under. Good to be back after a couple of months off. A bit happening off the pitch in the off season for the Tigers, which we'll get into in a little bit. But to start with, I've got Logan with me.
Good evening, everyone. Alex.
And I've also got Brad.
Good evening, gents and everyone.
Good evening, good evening. I'll start with you, Brad. It's been a bit of a tumultuous off-season, to say the least. We can start with the positive news first, I suppose, and talk about the appointment of Leonid Slutsky as our manager. I think in our last episode we were talking about the impending appointment, but he hadn't actually joined the club yet. We've also filled out his backroom staff with various coaches, Pennock amongst them, probably the most notable name. But what have you made of the staffing appointments?
Look, it sort of came out of left field. I had all these envisaged dreams of hiring recycled championship managers or even ex-Premier League managers, but to get someone out of left of field is actually probably not surprising, but also probably what we needed. We probably needed to have a real tilt at it. We didn't have a Steve Bruce type serious candidate to pinch it on to try and get us back up. So we need someone who's probably as career driven and aligned as what the club's ambitions are. And, you know, on paper anyway, he certainly looks like he could be a strong force.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you just have to look at who Sunderland have managed to appoint in Simon Grayson, who was pretty much a mid-table championship sort of manager at Preston North End, Leeds, other clubs like that. Not a hugely inspiring appointment for the Sunderland fans, so it's kind of funny actually. Our two summers have really mirrored each other, Sunderland and City, with the players we've been after, and obviously the financial situation. So Logan, it's a bit interesting to see that they've obviously gone for the sort of safe option, if you like, that they're not going to get relegated if that was really a concern of theirs. Whereas we've sort of gone for it a bit, and I guess it's a bit inspired by the Silver appointment last January.
Yeah, of course. That's one way of looking at it. I think the million-dollar question for everybody is what is the correct championship formula for how teams go back up. I mean, we see a lot of these bigger clubs in the past, your Newcastle and your West Ham's fall, and they're able to bounce back up because of the funds and just the size of stadium and size of the club, really, that's available to them, provides them that opportunity to bounce back quite quickly. And then we saw under Steve Bruce the approach where he obviously tried to build his team around the English players and more to try and get that domestic spine, if you like, and then build from that, which has also paid dividends. So it is always interesting to see how we go about our business, and then when you look at the clubs like, I guess, your Sunderlands and your Middlesbroughs as well, that are kind of in the same ballpark as us, having come back from the Premier League, how they choose to start their approach.
Yeah, speaking of keeping that English spine, it's a bit funny seeing Myla's comments today that when Slutsky first joined the club and was speaking about retaining that core of the club and saying he needed his British players like Myla, and Myla had to point out, well, actually, Ireland's not actually in the UK, so it was a bit of a funny one in that regard. But I suppose Slutsky's appointment was where the good news ended for a lot of fans. Ehab obviously giving that interview quite soon after relegation was confirmed, saying we wanted the manager in the first few weeks, and then we were going to make our player signings in the weeks after that. And as the weeks trickled on, it took quite a while for our first signing in Ola Aina on loan from Chelsea, right before the team left for Portugal. And it was almost, I think I saw it compared to a reality TV show, was the Portuguese training camp, with which player's going to leave today. We saw quite a few departures in that regard, with Huddleston, Jakupovic, Maguire, Robertson, El Mohammadi, all leaving the camp, with very few coming in. Logan, I'll start with you on the outgoings first of all, and what you make of those. You know, which ones you anticipated going, which ones surprised you, and how you feel the squad's sort of been left after that.
Yeah, okay. Well, certainly I think that Maguire and Robertson were the two that we kind of headhunted at the end of the season and said that we were almost resigned to losing them, obviously because of the price tag that we knew both of them would carry. So that wasn't unexpected, and I think that given the financial recoup we've been able to get from those two, it's certainly pleasing. I think that's where the kind of benefit seems to end when we go back down the list and we notice that we've lost Elmo, we've lost Davies, we've lost Huddleston, and the big one in Jakubovic, the cult hero, for very measly sums in which we can't really find championship players, or they're difficult to find championship players of that quality and experience to kind of replace them with, if you like. And so I think that for the measly amount of coin that we've got from those in particular, it's certainly left us with a relatively thin squad, and as you mentioned, a large group of the kind of original core members and fan favourites. To lose them was certainly surprising and very disheartening, I think, for many of the fans at the moment.
Yeah, I think the stat that Dan, one of our other podcasters, mentioned just before we went to air was that of the starting 11 last season against Leicester in the first game of the season, there's only 5 of them left at the club, let alone in our starting 11 these days. So it's a pretty strong or high level of turnover that we've seen. And the name you mentioned there that I found most surprising leaving was Davies, who always seemed quite a strong club servant and very loyal. And not that his departure was necessarily disloyalty or anything like that, but it was just a surprising name to see as essentially one of the first ones out the door. Brad, how did you see the outgoings that we've experienced so far?
Look, I thought very similar to what Logan said. There was a couple of the obvious ones. I think even probably to some extent, maybe Huddleston wasn't a surprise for me. Seems to be not as engaged as the first season he joined us, but Davies was the shock for me. Fair enough if he was getting Premier League football, but to just switch sides, so to speak, clearly shows either that it was all about the money or he just hadn't had enough of the situation. But I would have thought pairing with Dawson, excuse me, in the back four this season would have been a pretty attractive reason to stay. Also considering the fact that Harry Maguire was gone and really we were looking at having our 2 experienced pairings back. But Yak was certainly a surprise. I still can't quite get over why he'd leave us for effectively a number 2 spot. But then again, maybe it's just a sign of what we don't get to see week in, week out, and that is there's been a lot of change at the club with managers and setups, and no doubt contract negotiations haven't been very stable in the last couple of years. So some of it doesn't come as a surprise, but Davies is the big shock. I think Robertson was always going to go, as was Maguire. They're 2 of your starlets. They're in their early 20s, and they are Premier League players now. We know that.
I think,
probably,
and perhaps most telling with Jakubovic was his comments along the lines of what you're suggesting, which was that he was happy to stay potentially, but that he just couldn't thrash out a new deal with the club.
Yeah, that's it, and we know what he's like. I mean, he just proved with that last sort of letter to everybody that's the sort of fibre of the bloke. And I just still found it interesting that he established himself at number 1, and it was at the club, not so much matter what the league was. But I mean, look, clearly we saw with Timon as well that you're either obviously right at the top of the salary list, and that's where they'll keep you, or pretty much from players say 8 through to 20, you're all just a calculation, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess on more positive news, we did see some signings eventually. Obviously, Aina, already mentioned, was the first one in the doors. Mazuk, who came in as a trialist initially and then finally was signed on a permanent deal after impressing, sort of solved that problem we were having with only one senior centre-back at the club. Not even fit, we only had Dawson. So Mazuk coming in, and then Hector coming in on loan from Chelsea is another great addition, I felt. But I think the most surprising one has to be Fraser Campbell coming back. I remember sitting up, I can't remember what I was doing, I was watching something, and news filters through that Campbell's on his way back to the club. I think it was Burnsy who tweeted it out, and couldn't really believe it, because he seems to get linked every summer, but obviously nothing ever came of it before now. Almost 10 years since he joined the club last time. Well, I think it is actually 10 years since he joined the club last time, just about. So, Logan, it probably would have been just around the time that we really started following City, well, at least in my case. So what are your memories of him, if you have any, and how do you feel about him coming back?
Well, I think the two memories of Fraser Campbell that will always stand out is firstly the assist to Dean Windass in the fateful playoff goal, and then of course the celebration when we played Cardiff on the final day of the season to go up. And I think essentially that sums the guy up for Hull fans. He is an incredibly polarizing person. He's loved and he's hated. And the fact that he does seem to get linked with us every single window was when I saw the links initially. I thought, here we go, the same old story, another couple of Fraser Campbell links, and then he's going to come out and obviously, denounce he's coming to join the club. And then straight away, it was almost seemingly effortless transition, and he was signed. I actually must say that I think it's a positive one, and I think that at first I didn't like the idea of it, but seeing him in the Sydney Strip again and seeing a couple of the things that he's put on social media, it's filled me with some optimism, and I think he's going to be a huge signing for us.
Brad, what do you make of Campbell's signing, and especially the fact that it was kept under wraps so much to the point that it was almost as soon as it was reported, he was already either in Portugal or very much on his way. And within a few hours was signed.
Yeah, look, I'll put it out there from the start. Obviously, I was a massive fan, and then obviously when he tried to give us all a heart attack in that playoff semi-final, that last game of the season against Cardiff, I turned on him pretty quick. But I think probably the thing that I love about it is the fact that this is his league. He's tried so hard at big clubs. He was at Man U and was supposed to be the next starlet and didn't get there. Came to us, helped get us promoted. Went then, was a superstar that was too good for us and had to go off and play at Spurs and Sunderland and all that, but never made it. And I think this is the time where he can actually sit there at his age and say, do you know what? This is the league I'm in. This is my standard, so to speak, and it's probably his last chance to prove that he can really make it. So I'm actually really rapt. I think probably the fact it was kept under wraps is a real surprise, considering, like you said, he's been shopped around, and I think from what I've heard, that's mainly his dad shopping him around every contract negotiation. But it wouldn't surprise me that he's actually come back, because I believe that, whether it's true or not, that his father is still his manager.
Yep.
And his manager still has some strong ties to guys like Dino and some of the ex-players at the club, Ian Ashby as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if maybe that connection or that bit of fibre is the reason why this was actually done the way it was. But that's only guesswork and what you hear anyway. But I think his record at this level, or let's call it, second tier football, hate to say it, is exceptional. It's when he's hit the Premier League that he's actually really not been the first 11 type player that he probably potentially should be.
Interesting, because it's a very similar sort of story as with Hernandez, who excels in the Championship and has a great scoring record, but just can't make that step up. So I almost wonder, it'd be interesting if Campbell has any sort of influence on Hernandez in that sense, and has any sort of words of wisdom for Hernandez and ambitions for his career.
Yeah, look, I agree. And I mean, let's face it, if you're a defender and you see on the team sheet you're up against those two, you're not exactly comfortable. And to be fair, the last time we really had a pairing that I think would make teams feel uncomfortable was when Campbell and Dino were playing together.
Yeah.
Since then, you think of all the pairings we've had Kusan and King, who obviously could do it, with Giovanni playing off Kusan, but Kusan was never going to score us 20 goals.
Probably the best partnership I can think of is Long and Jelavic since Campbell and at least.
That would be it. That's it. But it's not something that we knew we were going to get.
Yeah,
that's right. From games 1 to 40, so to speak. So I'm quite excited about the fact that we've got him, and more importantly, quite excited about the fact that we're not actually getting players who are getting right toward the end of their careers. Obviously, I think Fraser's 28 or something like that now, so he's still got a few years left in him. And I think probably the encouraging thing, I know there's been a lot of negativity about the delay in signing players, but nearly all the players we've signed should actually be players that, if we push through and do get close to promotion or promotion, would stay at the club, potentially, if we did get promoted. I know there's some loan players in there, But yeah, so far it's probably just the lack of signings which has been the frustration, I think.
Absolutely, and I think Slutsky sort of mentioned he hopes to get one or two more through the door before the game against Villa, which I think would suggest that they need to be done relatively soonish. But he's at least positive in talking about getting 5 more through the doors, and I think you're right. I mean, Sunderland, as I mentioned before, is sort of the comparison club, and whilst they've made a couple more signings than us, and they've lost a similar number of players, I think they've lost 13 to our 15. Their signings haven't inspired as much confidence. They've signed a couple of players on loan from Everton. They've signed a couple of cast-offs from Everton. So they're not exactly bringing in top-end championship quality players. Whereas I feel our signings have been much more deliberate, much more methodical, and we've managed to recruit quite well, I think. The other player that we haven't really touched on is Stewart from Liverpool, which was our £4 million signing, which was a bit of a surprise that we've spent that much money on a player, which, you know, might bode well as another one of those sort of younger players that we bring through, and in a couple of years, you know, we're looking at a similar sort of transition to what we were able to see with Liverpool, where we bring them in, they perform well, they gel in the team, and then make that transition in a couple of years. So Logan, what did you make of his signing? Because that one was a bit more of a surprise, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it is a surprise to us, but I think with the outgoing of Huddleston, it was almost forced out of necessity. And from all reports, he's has a strong pedigree. I think coming through perhaps the Tottenham and then into the Liverpool setup, I think he'll be a solid player from all reports. But again, very early days. It will be interesting to see how he comes along. The one thing that I wanted to add to that before is when you're talking about the strike partnership, is the recent form of Jared Bowen as well. That even if he becomes that option for to play up front, with Diamande and Bowen still putting pressure on Campbell and Hernandez as well, then it does kind of show that we do have a few more goal scorers in our ranks than we probably initially thought we would have.
Absolutely. I think Bowen's the one who's really impressed me this pre-season, and I was saying to a few people, if we'd signed him from Liverpool for £4 million and Stewart was just a kid coming through the ranks, you'd be pretty excited about Bowen's potential, because I feel like there's this sort of stigma attached to players who come through the youth ranks where you think, oh well, because you haven't purchased them, the perception is that they aren't quite good enough for that grade. But really, I mean, he's been the standout player in pre-season, and he's playing alongside Grzycki, Hernandez, Campbell, Stewart, you know, all of these guys who were expecting to be sort of these stars in this division, and he's the one sort of head and shoulders above them. And he's not scoring against, you know, League 2 or non-league opposition. He got a pretty fantastic goal against Benfica, so it's really exciting for what could be ahead for him in this season. Obviously he got his go against Spurs on the last day of the season and had a pretty decent chance to score and sort of fluffed his lines, but he's had that taste of Premier League and really sort of coming through the ranks quite well.
Yeah, certainly. It will be interesting to see how he goes. And I guess also the fact that he does feel like a homegrown product in many respects because of the look of the current squad. I think he'll be one that the fans will certainly get behind. And he does have that that high energy and high work rate that he's certainly always appreciated by the whole City faithful.
Before we move on to the Villa preview, I figure we should just discuss some of the other off-field news that's broken over the last couple of weeks, and in particular one piece of news that we were sort of keeping a close eye on as international supporters, and that was the decision by the club not to proceed with the international streaming service. And I do believe, I haven't checked every single club, but I do believe we're the only club in the championship not to offer some form of streaming. I know there's a number of clubs, I think up to about 7 or 8, that aren't using the iFollow platform, but they are offering their own services. I think Villa, Leeds, Wolves are the ones that I've checked, and they're all offering their own service. I don't know if it's 100% been confirmed by the club that what their pricing is going to be for the international supporters who want to listen to live radio streams. I know they've announced it's, I think, £5 for the month for UK listeners. I don't know if that's going to just be a global thing and it's just going to be £5 a month, sort of like the old Tiger player. But it's obviously really disappointing news, and we sort of tweeted about it at the time. But Logan, what was your initial reaction to it, and how do you feel about it now?
Well, I can't say that I'm surprised, and that's, I guess, the sad reality of the way the club's looking under the alums. There's certainly no regard for any of the local fans and I guess the regional Hull fans, if you will, and the fact that that's now been extended to the international network of fans as well is extremely disappointing. Particularly when you consider the time restraints and the fact that a lot of the games kick off at 2 a.m. And there's a commitment in itself to kind of have to get up or stay up for those fixtures. But just looking through my notes too, they've got 13 clubs that are straight onto iFollow, and looking at the size of some of those clubs, your Preston North Ends, your Boltons, your Brentfords. We're talking Burton Albion. You're talking about clubs that are far smaller, and the club's excuse for not providing the international kind of segue for streaming was because they thought it was going to be it's not cost effective for the club. Yet, in comparison, we look and see smaller clubs being able to fork out the money for their international fans. And I guess that's probably the saddest part about the whole thing. And I think it really is unacceptable if we look at the position that Hull are in at the moment, and the fact that we've had the whole name change debacle, we've been through the FA, and the alums' excuse was because they wanted to become more marketable and more commercially presentable, I guess, to the international market. And then the first people that kind of get left on the outer are international fans. I mean, I'm no businessman, but it certainly seems very contradictory in the methods that are being employed by the ownership at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think the only thing I would say on that is it seems as if the clubs using iFollow are still in this, I forget what it's called, it's the EFL websiting agreement or something like that, where they all use those cookie cutter websites, which the club opted out of. And I think, well, fantastic, you want to do your own website, that's fine. But are they really deriving enough commercial revenue from that to make it worthwhile, to the point where they could justify saying, well, we're not going to stay in this agreement that gives us, I'm assuming it must be a nominal fee or even for free for these clubs, because as you say, I mean, if there's clubs like Bolton who are signed up to iFollow, who are in huge amounts of debt and are only signing, very cheap, very affordable players, if they're even signed up to it, I would suspect it doesn't even cost them anything. So to stay in this EFL agreement, put up with having this cookie cutter website, but then having this free streaming service or very cheap streaming service, as you say, to market themselves to these international supporters they claim they really are after to expand the size of the club. And Mitch, another of our podcast alumni, was picked up by the Supporters Trust in tweeting out that there's 732 of us alone in the Australian supporters group, let alone the American supporters group. There's the, I think it's the Norwegian supporters group I follow on Twitter. There's other places in Europe that follow the club, Italian, etc. All of these groups, all of these places have, let's assume 20 or 30 hardcore dedicated supporters will be up every game, watching the games, willing to fork out money for the club. I can't see how it's not justifiable to some extent to sort of repay these supporters who, as you say, make this huge commitment to stay up until crazy hours of the morning, as we will be doing against Villa on Saturday night. Brad, what was your take on, or feelings about this?
Well, mate, it actually was a surprise, because I thought the whole iFollow system is so easy. You just literally sign up and they do everything, that the alums would go, oh, look how good we could be. But typically the moral fibre of them comes out to the front, and it just shows you that, I think if I was guessing, they had their row with the Football League about the name change and realised it's not going to happen under the league's watch either. Obviously, it's a different governing body we're dealing with now. And I reckon they thought, the best way to do is distance ourselves from everything to do with the league, including the coverage. And I know that sounds like a bit of a sort of left of field comment, but that's what it smacks of. They're the last club, I believe, to announce what they're actually going to do for the season. And a friend of mine's a lower league supporter, and he said their club announced like 6 weeks ago what their TV or international coverage is, and they're a lot smaller club than ours. And it's almost like we hear of grumblings again, and then this comes out. So, look, I can't believe it would be a financial decision, because from what I understand, the iFollow system is literally very much self-supported, in that they've got their own sponsorship, their own everything to generate their own revenue to cover it. So the club isn't actually having to do much to run it themselves. It just sounds typically like the Allams think they can do things better and stronger themselves, and that's the way they've taken it. So for me, I think we've got to start our new Facebook group where we can just get some of our local friends to do a bit of Facebook Live in a protected environment.
Yeah, that might be the solution. The other piece of news sort of linked to this and related to somebody that I mentioned a bit earlier, breaking the news of the Campbell sale or purchase, was the announcement that Humberside BBC won't be covering the games this season. Burnsy and Swanee won't be able to tell us what colour socks and shoes and whatever else the players are wearing as they run around. And they've sort of been a staple of the club for so long, and especially Burnsy with his interviews with the players after the games. I don't know what sort of coverage or access they'll maintain, but as you say, Brad, it sort of smacks of the club distancing themselves from all of these organisations or bodies that have sort of been seen to dismiss them or criticise them over the last few years in particular. And we'll see Viking FM take up the broadcasting of the matches, which remains to be seen what sort of job they do. But considering in their announcement they announced that they were covering the Hull Tigers games, I don't think they're off to the best of starts. But what did you make of that as well, Brad?
Oh, look, exactly as you said, Alex, it sounds like we're getting back to throwing our toys out the cot, and anyone that's not with us is against us. I mean, look, love Burnsy or Swanee or hate them, at least, the BBC coverage came with the backing. You knew what you were getting, and I don't believe at any times we ever had any real issue other than maybe the commentary itself. But the thing that probably really, sticks in all of this is just as you said, Alex, you can't get away from the fact that the first time they had their chance to resonate with their potential new listenership, let's call it, they refer to the one thing that is the stick in everyone's craw at the moment.
Absolutely. So it remains to be seen what sort of coverage they'll give for the games. There is a bit of a worry that there will be certain terms of the agreement that makes sure that they do reference the club in particular ways, which I'm sure will not go down well with a broad section of the supporter base. But Logan, I know you've especially listened to Burnsy and Swanee a fair bit in recent years. I think you were a subscriber of Tigers Player. So what did you make of the decision and the announcement that they would no longer be broadcasting the games?
Yeah, I think that the Tigers Player or the BBC Humberside commentary, Humberside commentary from Burnsy and Swanee, it became synonymous for us as City fans, particularly, excuse me, when we were relegated and did kind of do the yo-yo in the Championship, then back up into the Premier League. For everyone listening who obviously doesn't come from Australia, we only ever get the Fox Sports or Optus now feeds when we are in the Premier League. And so any Championship game that we've ever had to follow has been provided from that Tigers Player and listening through Swanee and Burnsy call the games. So it certainly will be in many ways something that we will miss, especially seeing we don't have access to view the games anymore because, as we've just spoken about, the live streaming option not being taken up by the club. But I think it certainly will be missed. I still get goosebumps listening to the BBC call of the game when we did go up against Cardiff, and I think that particularly for the people who were listening on that day, that there's many phrases that Burnsy and Swanee said were the raw emotion of just how much they rode the club and kind of gave you that extra buzz. To not have them calling the game will sound extremely different to what we've been used to for the last this glory period of the club, if you will.
Absolutely, and hopefully there'll be some sort of option in the future for them to return to covering the club, because I'm sure everyone will miss their unique sort of coverage of the club in the meantime. But we'll finish off hopefully on more positive terms and actually look forward to the first game of the season, which feels like it's come around rather quickly. It's at times felt quite a long off season, but the first game of the season's really crept up all of a sudden. Playing Aston Villa this Saturday night, 2:30 a.m. our time, or 2:15 a.m. our time, I think it might be. We'll certainly be staying up to watch that game from my point of view at least. It's on beIN Sports here, so it'll be one of the few games that we'll actually be able to see televised. And it's a pretty poetic first game of the season, and I think, as Brucey said when he was commenting on the fixture in his interviews for Aston Villa, that it was sort of destined to be to some extent. So we go up against Steve Bruce in the first game, and also Ahmed El Mohammadi, who made the switch in the off-season. So it promises to be a pretty heated clash, or a pretty, clash that we're all sort of looking forward to see. First game back against Steve Bruce. No recognised left back in the squad at this stage, which might be a bit concerning. But Logan, how do you rate our chances, and how do you reckon we'll go?
I think first game of the season is always one that's impossible to pick. It'll be purely going out on a limb, but I really have to be honest and say that I'm scared of Villa, and I think that they're one of the teams that I'm picking to go up. So the first day away to them, I can't really see us getting a result. I think we'll probably be on the end of a 2-0 loss.
And I think the only two times we've been relegated so far from the Premier League, and so this is the third time. So the first two times we've been relegated from the Premier League, we've won our first game of the season 2-0, went back in the Championship against Swansea and then against Huddersfield. So hopefully 3 times lucky, but how do you see this one, Brad?
Look, I do fear it a little bit, especially seeing the fact that you've got some of our players that have only been in training for 9-10 days or even less. The only thing I'd probably say is if ever there's a time to get Villa away, it's going to be this week. And the fact that we can actually start the season with that, say, a little bit less pressure to actually win means we might actually pinch something. One thing we should have is quite a few hungry players looking for cementing a spot with the new manager. So I wouldn't think the betting is favouring us very much at all, especially with what Villa spend and the fact they're playing at home. But it's probably not a bad time looking through this long season to actually play them away.
And in terms of the lineup, I suppose the biggest decision to be made, or one of the biggest decisions to be made, will be the centre-back pairing. Mazouk obviously playing the majority of the pre-season games alongside Dawson, but Hector coming in our last game against Ajax, and from all reports doing quite well. Logan, from your limited knowledge of the players so far, who would you prefer to see in that centre-back pairing with Dawson? The player who's, I guess, played the more pre-season games against him, or Hector, who I suppose is slightly higher rated?
Yeah, I think it probably has to be Hector, given the fact that, as you mentioned, he is higher rated, or more highly rated rather, and the fact that he does have that Chelsea pedigree. But again, I wouldn't be too fussed to see either, to be perfectly honest. I think that given the magnitude of the first game of the season and everything is a little bit up in the air, having not seen them train, having not seen what Slutsky's kind of plans for them are, I think that Hector will be probably the one that I'd be picking, but again, it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other.
And I suppose on the assumption that we're not going to sign a left back before Saturday, we'll likely see Lenihan lining up at right back with Aina at left back, and that pretty much sorts that back four. And of course, as well, Marshall's injury, unfortunately, at the start of pre-season has left McGregor almost unchallenged as our keeper. I suppose the other big question is up front, whether we go with one up top in just Hernandez or whether we go for 2 up top with Campbell. Brad, do you reckon Campbell starts the game? Do you think? I mean, I know there's been a few stories that he hasn't had a whole lot of pre-season training and his fitness levels might not be up to it. Do you see maybe Campbell coming off the bench for this one and Hernandez starting the game on his own up top?
Yeah, look, it's hard to see what sort of formation the coach will run with because he's still probably trying to work that out for himself. The one thing you would say, though, is if you're going to have a real go at it, which is probably the only way to play this game, is I can see him probably even rotating between Hernandez, Bowen or Campbell. But I'd probably say, realistically, Campbell's still not at his peak. And it's going to be a long season and I wouldn't rush it anyway. And I think probably at the moment you'd be saying Hernandez plays up top. The only issue with that is it's going to have to be someone really in that advanced midfield role to support him because whilst we know how good he can be, he doesn't always appear to be that real strong holding centre forward. He really wants to get on the end and attack him. So I do think that they've got to be careful if they do just play Hernandez up top, that we are just not spending most of the day rebounding.
Yeah, and I guess midfield is the area of the pitch that we are most well stocked in. With Henriksen, I reckon Henriksen could actually be a bit of a surprise packet this season. He seems to have the sort of game that I really reckon could be quite solid in the championship. He's got the skill level, but he's also got a bit more physicality about him that I reckon might suit him well. I guess one question that we haven't really touched on yet is the saga ongoing with Grzycki and his attempted moves or suspected attempted moves to try and figure out a move to the Premier League, with not many clubs too interested in signing him at this stage. Logan, do you reckon Grzycki will still be here at the end of the window? And if so, how do you reckon he'll go this season?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think it's still up in the air. I don't know if it's easy to make an assumption on that, because whilst the reports that are coming out do seem to suggest that he is unhappy, and he certainly hasn't offered too much in pre-season. I saw that he tweeted tonight there was a couple of fans giving him some stick, telling him that he wasn't interested, and he just retweeted back to them that he's 100% ready for Saturday and can't wait. So, I mean, make of that what you will. But I think that if he does, if Slutsky does pull him aside and get in his head, and he does realise the kind of, I guess, the difficulty in the championship and how it is such an extremely tough yet integral league, then I think he could cause some damage. And I think that we've all seen under Silva the raw pace and ability he does have for creating chances, if nothing else. And I think that if he can get his head right, the asset that he would be in the championship would be unbelievable. I don't think he will stay, if I'm being perfectly honest, but I think if he does, I think it'll take him a couple of weeks to finish looking, and I think then he'll come back and be a really big weapon for us.
Because I think that's the other one that's been a bit surprising, is just how long Hernandez has stayed at the club. I think we were all surprised in that initial season after relegation that he was there after the window closed, and just how good he ended up being in the championship. Because I know when we first went down, he was probably of Enjoy, Jelavic and Hernandez. He was the one I thought most likely to leave. I thought Jelavic much more likely to pull up his socks and actually give it a go in the championship. So the fact that not only did he stay that season, but he looks like he's going to stay and see out a fourth year with the club is pretty surprising and pretty impressive if that's going to be the case. Brad, what's your take on the Grzycki situation?
Yeah, look, pretty similar. I mean, rumours are rumours, and obviously there's been enough clubs linked to him to say that if it's not him wanting to go, his agent's certainly trying to find somewhere for him. But I think probably the only thing that I think is probably missed a little bit with this is that there was obviously clubs that did come in for him very, very early on that he said no to, because he wanted this whole, I'm playing in the Premier League now and that's it. Whereas I'd be surprised now if a Premier League club did even come for him. Most of them now are pretty well settled into pre-season, into their last sort of hurrah of friendlies, and I can't see, if he was such a good signing for a club, that they're going to run around and try and snaffle him now. Call that naive, I don't know, but I can actually see him doing what Hernandez had to do when all that talk happened some time ago, where he was going to leave to about 5 different clubs for lots of different money, and like you said, he sits back and takes it and stops looking and ends up being pretty much a starlet player for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be quite an interesting one to see over the next few weeks until the window closes. And I suspect, given the way we've done business in the last few years, now's the time at the window where I think we'll see a lot more activity happening, especially towards the last few days of the window. We always seem to like getting a bit of business done late in the window, so I'm sure there's a lot to look forward to in that regard over the next few weeks, as well as the game against Villa on the weekend. So before we sign off, I'll get a score prediction from each of you. How do you see the score for the weekend, Brad?
I actually think it'll be a draw, and we'll get a 2-2 draw.
Interesting. And Logan?
My pessimistic side is still telling me Villa 2-0.
All right, well, I'll balance it out and go optimistic side and say we'll stick with our winning formula of 2-0 wins to kick Premier League championship seasons off right after relegation. I suspect, I mean, I get the sense just to a little bit that Bruce, being Bruce, might go a bit cautious opening day of the season on TV at home against his former club, might go a little bit cautious, and who knows, Hernandez might pop up and score a couple of goals for us. So here's hoping we can get off to a positive start and be back here in a week's time talking about how we sort of defied the odds for a second season running and win on the opening day against all the odds. But until then, thanks for joining me today, Logan.
Yeah, not a problem.
And thank you as well, Brad.
Thanks very much, mate.
Thanks everyone for listening in, and as I said, hopefully next week we're back here discussing a big City win. So until next week, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.